The lawyer placed a bank letter on the walnut table. It confirmed that $2 million had been wired into escrow for Sophie and me, provided we signed before 5 o'clock. Less than 12 hours earlier, Victor Ashford's widow had seen the crescent-shaped birthmark on Sophie's shoulder and whispered, "I saw that mark on a newborn 18 years ago." Now the family attorney sat across from us, with a 22-page agreement and the calm expression of a man presenting a reasonable solution. Sophie would release every claim to the Ashford Descendants Trust. She would make no public statement about her biological connection to the family. She would never contact Caroline Ashford Caldwell or Caroline's 2 sons without written permission. My schedule was different. I had to surrender the original note, the silver pendant, and every record connected to the night Sophie was found outside my apartment. $2 million could erase my mortgage, pay for Sophie's college, replace the car that stalled every winter, and let me close the alterations shop before my hands became too stiff to thread a needle. Then Sophie reached the clause requiring her to deny any future request to establish her identity. Her fingers closed around the pendant she had worn since her 13th birthday. Her face remained calm, but I saw the pulse jumping in her throat. "What are you afraid I'll inherit? The money or the truth?" The lawyer did not answer. Sophie pushed the bank letter back across the table. "Put in writing who authorized this," she said. "And tell them I'm keeping the necklace." That was when I understood the offer was not meant to make us rich. It was meant to make Sophie disappear for the second time. 18 years earlier, I had opened my apartment door and found her in a bassinet with a silver pendant and a note that said, "Please love her before they find her." I had spent nearly 2 decades wondering who they were. By the time we left that office, I knew the more painful question. Why had Sophie's own mother become one of them? Before I take you back to the morning Sophie arrived, I hope you're doing well. Stay with me, because every answer opened a deeper wound. And please subscribe so you won't miss what happened next. To understand why $2 million frightened me more than it tempted me, I have to go back to the morning Sophie arrived. I was 38 years old and living alone in a 3rd-floor apartment on Willow Street. On the 7th of October, 2008, I came home after midnight with rainwater dripping from my coat and pins still caught in the cuff of my sweater. A bride had torn the side seam of her wedding dress 3 days before the ceremony, and I had stayed at the alterations shop until the lace lay flat again. The hallway smelled of wet plaster and somebody's burnt coffee. I had just fitted my key into the lock when I heard a faint sound behind me. It was not a full cry. It was a thin, tired rasp, so soft that I first thought it came from the radiator. I turned toward the stairwell. No one was there. When I looked through the peephole from inside my apartment, I saw only the yellow hallway light and the empty landing. Then the sound came again, followed by a small movement near the wall. A covered bassinet had been placed beside my door, tucked away from the draft coming through the stairwell window. I opened the door slowly. Inside the bassinet lay a newborn wrapped tightly in a cream hospital blanket. Her cheeks were pale pink, her dark hair damp against her head. A tiny bandage covered one heel, and the stump of her umbilical cord had been cleaned and clamped. Whoever had cared for her knew what they were doing. I touched 2 fingers to the side of her neck and felt a rapid pulse. Her chest rose, but her lips looked dry. I called 911 before lifting the bassinet across the threshold, keeping my door open so the dispatcher could hear everything around me. "There's a newborn outside my apartment," I said. "She's breathing. I don't know how long she's been here." The dispatcher told me not to feed her and asked whether I could see any injuries. As I checked the blanket, I found a small muslin pouch pinned to the inner lining of the bassinet. Inside was a silver pendant and a folded note. "Please love her before they find her." Below that, in smaller handwriting, were 2 more lines. "Her name is Sophia. Born the 6th of October 2008 at 3:18 a.m. I read the words twice while the baby made another weak sound. The dispatcher asked if anyone had left the building. I stepped into the hallway, but saw only the dark stairs and rain streaking the window. Later, a police officer told me someone had called 911 from a payphone less than a block away, reported a baby at my address, and hung up. The person who left her had stayed close enough to know I opened the door. Paramedics arrived first, followed by 2 police officers. They photographed the hallway before moving anything. One officer placed the pendant and note into separate evidence bags, while another wrote down every word I could remember. At the hospital, a pediatrician estimated that Sophia was less than 48 hours old. She was mildly dehydrated, but she had no injuries and no signs of exposure. There was no hospital bracelet, no name in the county birth registry, and no missing newborn report that matched her. A child welfare worker named Janet Collins met me near the nurse's station. She had known me from my foster license and from Micah, the little boy who had lived with me 2 years earlier. I had loved Micah enough to imagine keeping him. Then his mother completed treatment, found stable housing, and did everything the court asked of her. When the time came, I packed his blue pajamas, his dinosaur books, and the nightlight he could not sleep without. I stood beside his mother during the transition, because loving him did not give me the right to make her my enemy. Janet remembered that. She did not offer me a child that night. She explained that Sophia was in protective custody, that the hospital would keep her while authorities searched for a parent, and that no one yet knew whether she would need a foster placement. I went home just before dawn, but sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the note inside that evidence bag. Please love her before they find her. The words sounded like fear, but the second 911 call did not fit with someone trying to let a baby die. Whoever had left Sophia wanted her found quickly. They had chosen my apartment, placed her away from the cold window, and waited nearby until I opened the door. 3 days later, Janet called. The agency had found no parent, no filed birth certificate, and no relative with a legal claim. Sophia was ready to leave the hospital, but the emergency foster home assigned to infants had taken 2 newborn siblings that morning. We need somewhere safe for a few days, Janet said. Maybe longer. I need you to understand that this is temporary. Temporary was a dangerous word for me. It had once meant waking with Micah's feet pressed against my ribs, then learning how to sleep after he went home. I looked at the empty corner of my bedroom where his crib had stood. How many homes will she go through if I say no? Janet was quiet for a moment. I can't promise only one. That answer made the decision for me. Sophia came home that afternoon as an emergency foster placement. She did not belong to me. I had no right to change her name, hide her history, or pretend the woman who left her had never existed. My job was to keep her safe until the system discovered what came next. On her first night, I sat beside the borrowed crib and listened to her breathe. The note was still with the police, the pendant locked in evidence, and somewhere beyond Willow Street was a person who knew my address, knew I had opened the door, and knew I would call for help. When Janet returned the next morning, she stood in my kitchen watching Sophia sleep against my shoulder. "Why you?" she asked. "Why would someone choose your door?" I told her the truth. I don't know. I did not know the woman who left Sophia had chosen my door because she had already watched me give one child back. For the first several nights, Sophia woke whenever the apartment became quiet. She could sleep through the radiator and traffic on Willow Street, but when every sound stopped, her arms jerked outward and a frightened cry rose from her crib. I moved my smallest sewing machine outside the bedroom and ran scraps beneath the needle without thread, letting the motor hum. Sophia would settle before I finished counting to 10. I did not call myself her mother. I knew what temporary placement meant, even when my heart tried to pretend otherwise. When she woke and searched the dim room with unfocused eyes, I rested my hand against her back and said the only thing I could promise. "I'm here." Janet Collins called every few days with updates. The agency had checked hospitals across the county, birth registrations, reports involving missing newborns, and notices from private adoption attorneys. Nothing matched the baby found outside my door. At the time, none of us knew she had been born in a private home and that the birth worksheet had never been filed. The note gave them a name and a precise birth time, but Janet warned me that handwriting was not proof. Until someone established legal parentage, the state could not assume Sophia was her birth name or that October 6 was unquestionably correct. The pediatrician's estimate supported the date, so Child Services used it to create a foundling record while the search continued. The pendant and original note remained in agency custody. I received photocopies marked with inventory numbers. Every time I opened the folder, I found myself staring at the same sentence. Please love her before they find her. About 6 weeks after Sophia came home, an attorney contacted Child Services and said he might represent a birth family connected to a private adoption. He would not give Janet a mother's name, produce a signed consent, or file a petition with the court. The agency told him that if he had a lawful claim, he needed to appear formally and provide evidence. He never called again. Instead of reassuring me, it made the note feel heavier. Someone could hire a lawyer but would not stand in court and name Sophia's mother. By winter, the temporary placement had become the shape of my life. I learned which formula upset her stomach and how to fasten a diaper without waking her. I kept a portable crib behind the shop counter and scheduled fittings around her naps. Customers began calling her my baby. I corrected them at first. She's staying with me for now. After a while, the word now began to feel dishonest. I still used it because the alternative frightened me more. Rose Alvarez came into the shop one gray afternoon, when Sophia was nearly 5 months old. I knew Rose through the foster family support. She was a nurse who had attended reunification meetings when Micah lived with me. She looked thinner than I remembered, and twice she turned away to cover a cough. Sophia was asleep in the portable crib near my cutting table. Rose stood several feet away and watched her, but she did not reach down or ask to hold her. I heard the placement was still open, she said. The investigation is still open, I corrected. No one has come forward. And if it stays that way? I folded a strip of ivory satin that did not need folding. Then the court decides what happens next. Rose studied me. That isn't what I asked. I looked at Sophia. One small fist rested beside her cheek. If she needs a permanent home, I said, I'll apply. Rose's face changed so slightly, I might have imagined it. Relief passed through her eyes, followed by something that looked like grief. You loved Micah enough not to make his mother your enemy, she said. He belonged with her once she was ready. You could have fought harder to keep him. I could have made everything harder. That isn't the same thing. Rose nodded and looked back at the crib. A child should know someone chose her for who she was, not for what she could give them. Before I could ask what she meant, another customer entered, carrying a bridesmaid dress in a plastic bag. Rose said she had an appointment and left without touching Sophia. A few weeks later, a cream-colored card arrived at the shop with no return address. Inside, someone had written 6 words. Thank you for keeping her safe. The handwriting looked familiar, but I could not place it. I made a photocopy and gave it to Janet. She added it to the file and told me not to respond if another card came. I kept the original inside a locked drawer beneath my tax receipts. I told myself Sophia might need it someday. I ignored my relief when no second message arrived. Rose stopped attending foster network meetings that spring. Someone said she had taken medical leave. Months later, I heard she had died from cancer. I sent flowers to the funeral home, but I did not connect her visit to the note, the pendant, or the unexplained card. At the time, she was only a kind woman who had asked a question I was already afraid to answer. The legal process moved slowly. The agency renewed notices, checked databases, followed credible leads, and documented the attorney who had refused to identify his client. Hearings were delayed twice. Each postponement gave me more time with Sophia and made the possibility of losing her harder to imagine. No parent appeared. No relative filed a claim. 21 months after I found her, A judge terminated the unknown parent's rights and approved my adoption petition. By then, Sophia could run across my kitchen in unsteady steps and say, "Up," whenever she wanted to be carried. At the hearing, the judge asked whether I understood adoption was permanent. I held Sophia against my chest. "That's the only part I understand without needing it explained." Her legal name became Sophia Mercer. I called her Sophie, and soon everyone else did too. After the order was entered, the court released the personal effects that had been held with her case. I signed for the original note and the silver pendant, each listed beside the same inventory numbers from the night she was found. I stored the note in a protective sleeve and locked the pendant beside it. I never lied to Sophie about being adopted. I answered her questions in words she could understand. I told her that someone had made sure she was found quickly, that the police had searched, and that no one had come forward to claim her. What I could not explain was why. Years accumulated through ordinary things. I sat beside her bed through fevers, ran behind her first bicycle until my lungs burned, and kept a dented cookie tin marked college beneath the counter at my shop. When she caught pneumonia at 6, I taped a sign to the front window, saying the shop would be closed while my daughter recovered. I slept in a chair beside her hospital bed, and reopened only when she could laugh without coughing. On her 13th birthday, I gave her the pendant. She turned it beneath the kitchen light and traced the engraved initials on the back. "C.A.," she read. "Do you know who that is?" "No." She wore it on a stronger chain and treated it less like jewelry than a piece of herself. 3 years later, she carried my old placement folder to the kitchen table. She had found photographs online of antique pendants, searched adoption registries, and written questions in the margins of a notebook. "We could try harder," she said. "There are databases now. Maybe CA is a person. Maybe the handwriting can lead somewhere." I saw hope in her face, but what I felt first was fear. Somewhere beyond Willow Street might be a family with more money, a larger house, and the blood connection I could never give her. "Some doors stay closed for a reason," I said. Sophie looked down at the pendant. "Whose reason?" I had no honest answer, so I told her I did not want her hurt by people who had chosen not to come back. She closed the folder and did not raise the subject again. I called that silence peace. I called my decision protection. The truth was not the only thing behind that closed door. My fear was there too. Sophie wrote the scholarship essay at our kitchen table in April 2026, with the silver pendant resting against the collar of her sweatshirt and 3 college brochures spread beside my sewing receipts. The application asked her to describe a person who had changed the direction of her life. I assumed she would write about a teacher or the counselor who had helped her apply to colleges. Instead, she typed the title, "The Mother Who Stayed." I told her she did not have to turn being adopted into a story for strangers. "I'm not writing about being abandoned," she said. "I'm writing about being raised." She did not fill the essay with speeches about sacrifice. She wrote about the winter I slept beside her when she had pneumonia, the cookie tin under my counter marked college, and the time I ruined a pair of shoes running behind her bicycle because she was too afraid to let me release the seat. Reading it made me proud, but it also made me uncomfortable in a way I could not explain. Sophie had taken the ordinary things I did because she was my daughter and turned them into evidence that I had chosen her. In July, an independent committee selected her as one of 3 recipients of the Ashford Promise Scholarship. The award would cover most of her first year of college and provide smaller grants after that if she maintained her grades. The name Ashford caught my attention. I thought about the initials engraved on the pendant, but CA could have belonged to thousands of people. Ashford was a common enough name around Philadelphia, especially on buildings, hospital wings, and charitable foundations. I told myself it was another door that did not need opening. The scholarship ceremony was scheduled for October 18. Sophie turned 18 on October 6, and 2 days later Victor Ashford died at 76. The family held a private burial, then announced that the scholarship presentation would remain part of a public memorial celebrating his philanthropy. Sophie considered withdrawing. "It feels wrong to accept an award at someone's funeral," she said. "It isn't his funeral," I reminded her. "It's a memorial, and the committee chose you months ago. His death doesn't erase your work." She agreed to attend, though I could tell she disliked the idea of reading her essay in front of a grieving family. I altered a dark blue dress for her. The fabric had come from a customer who changed her mind after I had already cut it, and the color made Sophie's eyes look almost black. The neckline sat high when she stood still, but shifted slightly near her left shoulder when she turned. On the morning of the memorial, I adjusted the seam twice. "It fits," Sophie said, laughing as she caught my hands. "You're going to sew me into it." "I'm checking the lining." "You checked the lining 10 minutes ago." I stepped back and looked at her. The little girl who once slept only when my sewing machine hummed was gone. In her place stood an 18-year-old who could read a room faster than most adults and pretend not to be nervous, even while twisting the pendant between her fingers. The memorial was held in the glass atrium of the Ashford Foundation. Large photographs of Victor Ashford stood between arrangements of white roses. None of the family members treated us badly. Staff members greeted us politely, and the other scholarship recipients looked just as uncomfortable in formal clothes as Sophie did. No one laughed at my homemade alterations or asked whether we belonged there. That almost made what happened later worse. The first half of the program focused on Victor's business career and charitable work. I listened from the second row while Sophie sat with the other scholarship recipients near the stage. Caroline Ashford Caldwell was introduced as Victor's only daughter and vice chair of the foundation. She was 41, elegant without appearing showy, with dark hair pulled away from her face. When she walked to the podium, something about the angle of her head made me sit straighter. Sophie tilted her head that way when she was trying not to disagree with someone. I dismissed the resemblance before the thought could fully form. People saw patterns when they were looking for them, and I had spent 16 years refusing to look. After Caroline spoke, the 3 scholarship recipients were called forward. Sophie unfolded her paper, looked toward me, and began. She described motherhood as a collection of decisions too small to photograph: a packed lunch, a chair beside a sick child's bed, a light left on until someone came home. Then she read the line that made the room completely still. "A mother is not chosen once on paper. She is chosen again every morning she stays." My throat tightened. Across the aisle, Caroline's fingers closed around the folded memorial program. The paper bent beneath her hand. She kept watching Sophie after the applause began, and when the next student stepped forward, Caroline did not turn toward him with the rest of the audience. I could not know what she was thinking. I only knew she looked like a woman who had heard something intended for her. After the ceremony, guests formed a receiving line near the scholarship display. Sophie had just finished speaking with one of the committee members when Caroline approached us. "You were remarkable," she told Sophie. Her voice was warm, but her gaze moved over Sophie's face, as if searching for something more precise than a resemblance. "Your name is Sophie Mercer?" "Yes." Caroline glanced at me. "And Diane is your mother?" "She is." Something in Sophie's tone made it clear that the answer required no qualification. Caroline looked back at her. "Did Diane keep the name Sophia?" The question hung between us. Sophie's expression changed first. "How did you know that was my name?" Caroline blinked, then gave a quick smile that did not reach her eyes. "I must have seen it in the scholarship file." The application used Sophie, not Sophia. I had reviewed every page before she submitted it. Before I could say so, Caroline touched the edge of the display table. "You lived on Willow Street, didn't you?" My pulse stumbled. "That was 18 years ago," I said. "It wasn't in her application." Caroline's hand left the table. "The foundation performs background checks. Perhaps I saw it there." There had been no reason for a vice chair to read an old address connected to a scholarship recipient's adoption. A silver-haired woman approached before I could press further. I recognized Evelyn Ashford from the photographs near the entrance. She was Victor's widow and Caroline's mother. Caroline stepped slightly between Evelyn and Sophie, a movement so quick it might have looked accidental to anyone who was not already watching closely. "Mother, this is Sophie Mercer," she said, "one of the scholarship recipients." Evelyn's attention moved from Sophie's face to the pendant at her throat. All the color left her expression. "Where did you get that?" she asked. "It was with me when I was found," Sophie said. Caroline reached for her water glass. "Mother, this is not the place." Sophie turned toward me, and the neckline of her dress shifted near her left shoulder. The crescent-shaped birthmark became visible. Evelyn stopped breathing for one terrible second. Her hand rose toward Sophie, then froze in the air. "I saw that mark on a newborn, 18 years ago." Caroline's glass slipped from her fingers and struck the floor. It did not shatter, but water spread across the polished stone and darkened the hem of her dress. Two nearby relatives turned at the sound. They could not have known what Evelyn meant, but they saw Caroline's face and stopped speaking. A man in a charcoal suit appeared beside us almost immediately. He introduced himself as the Ashford family's attorney and asked Evelyn whether she needed to sit down. Caroline whispered something to him, then guided her mother toward a private hallway. Before leaving, Evelyn looked back at Sophie. It was not the look of a woman seeing a familiar birthmark on a stranger. It was the look of someone watching a secret return in human form. The attorney politely ended the receiving line and asked whether Sophie and I could remain for a private conversation. I refused. We had already been stared at enough. "We will need to clarify a sensitive family matter," he said. "You can call us after you decide what you're willing to explain," I told him. Sophie did not speak until we reached the parking garage. Her hands shook as she fastened her seatbelt. "Mom, she knew my name. I heard her. And the street. I heard that too." My phone rang before I started the car. The man from the memorial identified himself again and said he had obtained my number through the scholarship office. He asked us to meet him the following morning, regarding Sophie's possible connection to the Ashford family. I agreed to hear what he had to say, but only because refusing would not erase what had already happened. The birthmark had not proved who Sophie was. It had proved the Ashfords already had a reason to fear who she might be. By the time we reached home, Sophie had stopped shaking, but she had not stopped touching the pendant. She sat at our kitchen table with her laptop open and searched Caroline Ashford Caldwell's name while I made tea. Neither of us drank. The memorial photographs appeared first, followed by charity events, wedding announcements, and older society pages that had been scanned into newspaper archives. Sophie opened a photograph of Caroline at 19, standing beside Victor Ashford at a museum gala. Around her neck was Sophie's pendant. Another image showed the back clearly enough to reveal the engraved initials C.A. Sophie lifted the necklace from her chest and held it beside the screen. "It's the same one. It looks the same," I said. She turned toward me. "Mom, it is the same." I brought out the police inventory from October 2008 and the court order releasing Sophia's personal effects to me after the adoption. The pendant was listed by weight, length, material, and engraving. So was the note. I placed the documents beside the laptop. "Whatever this means, no one can say we took that necklace from the Ashfords yesterday. It was with you when you were found." Sophie read every line. Her finger stopped at the initials. My phone rang at 9:17. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice was not. "This is Caroline Caldwell," she said. "Please don't hang up." I looked at Sophie. She nodded once, so I put the call on speaker. "How did you get my private number?" I asked. "There are contact details in the scholarship system. That system belongs to the foundation." A pause followed. "I know this is not how any of this should happen, but I need to speak to Sophie before the attorneys turn it into something else. The family attorney already scheduled a meeting for tomorrow." "I know. That is why I'm calling tonight." She asked whether we could meet privately. I refused to take Sophie anywhere after what had happened at the memorial, but I agreed to a video call. A few minutes later, Caroline's face appeared on Sophie's laptop. Her hair was loose, and most of her makeup had been wiped away. She looked less like the woman from the foundation website than someone who had been holding herself together until she reached a locked room. Her eyes went immediately to the pendant. That belonged to me. Sophie did not move closer to the camera. Then tell me how it got into a bassinet outside my mother's apartment. Caroline closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, the careful public voice was gone. Your father's name was Daniel Reed, she said. We met in college. He was 24 when he died in a car accident. Sophie's hand tightened around the chain. Caroline had been 5 months pregnant when Daniel died. Victor had never approved of him. Without Daniel beside her, she was moved to a guest house on the Ashford property in Bryn Mawr, where the pregnancy was hidden. My father told me I could keep the baby and lose everything, she said. My home, my education, every account with my name on it, and any place in the family. Or I could let them arrange an adoption and return to my life. Sophie's face hardened. That doesn't sound like a choice. It wasn't, Caroline said. She explained that Victor and Evelyn had hired a doctor and a nurse for a private birth at the guest house. A married couple had already been selected to adopt the baby. Lawyers were preparing the documents, though Caroline had not yet signed the final consent. The nurse was Rose Alvarez, she continued. She was the only person who treated me as if I were still a mother. The name made me lean toward the screen. Rose knew me. Caroline's gaze shifted to me. She said she knew someone who would protect a child without asking what the child could give her. Sophie looked at me, but neither of us interrupted. Caroline said she had named the baby Sophia before anyone could tell her not to. She had held her only briefly. Before Rose left the room, Caroline removed the pendant Victor had given her as a teenager and placed it in Rose's hand. I wanted you to have one thing that proved you came from somewhere, she said. For the first time since the memorial, Sophie's anger softened into a wish to believe. What happened after that? She asked. Rose took you before the private placement was completed. My father's attorneys searched, but they would not tell me where. After Rose left, my father told me the child was beyond our reach. The sentence sounded like grief. It also sounded carefully built. Caroline had not said she believed Sophie was dead. She had not said she was told Sophie was unsafe. She had said only that Victor called the child beyond their reach. Sophie touched the birthmark beneath her dress. Your mother recognized this. Caroline nodded. When you were born, it was darker. My mother called it the little moon. That explained Evelyn's reaction. She had not recognized a hereditary mark shared through generations. She had remembered a specific newborn she had seen with her own eyes. Neither the birthmark nor the pendant proved parentage. But Caroline knew details absent from any public adoption record. Sophie asked, Why didn't you go to child services? Caroline looked down before answering. I didn't know which agency had you. I didn't know what name they used or where Rose had taken you. Perhaps she truly had not known in the first days. But she knew Rose's name and had access to Ashford lawyers. I could not believe no trace had surfaced in 18 years. Sophie wanted the answer to be simpler than that. You thought I was adopted by strangers? She asked. I hoped you were safe. That isn't what I asked. Caroline's lips trembled. I was 23, grieving Daniel, and terrified of my father. By the time I understood what had happened, too much time had passed. She then asked if she could meet Sophie alone before the legal meeting. No, I said immediately. Both of them looked at me. Caroline drew back. I wasn't asking to take her anywhere. You had 18 years to decide what you wanted. You don't get private access to her because your mother recognized a birthmark. Mom, Sophie said quietly. She has already used confidential scholarship information to call us. We do not know what she wants. I want to hear her without everyone answering for me. I am not answering for you. I am protecting you. The words left my mouth before I heard how familiar they sounded. Sophie's expression changed. You said doors stay closed for a reason. She says too much time passed. Everyone keeps deciding what I should know because they're afraid of what happens after I know it. I wanted to say I was different because I had stayed. But standing between Sophie and the truth was still standing in her way. I took a breath. You should not meet her alone tomorrow, but the choice to speak with her is yours. We find an independent lawyer first, someone who does not work for this family. Sophie held my gaze, then nodded. Caroline agreed too quickly. I can arrange someone. No, I said. We will. After the call, Sophie kept staring at Caroline's photograph and placed her hand over the police inventory. She gave me the necklace. That appears to be true. And she named me. Yes. Sophie looked toward the dark window. Maybe she really couldn't find me. I did not challenge her. Caroline had finally offered her a reason that did not begin with rejection. At 11:42, an email arrived from the Ashford family attorney, confirming the next morning's appointment. A summary described Sophie as presenting a potential descendant claim and referred to Diane Mercer's home as a previously verified Mercer household. I read the phrase twice. The memorial had been less than 1 day earlier. No one had visited our home. No investigator had spoken to us. Yet the attorney's own document described my household as previously verified. I turned the laptop towards Sophie. They knew about us before yesterday. The hope in her face did not disappear, but it became guarded. The Ashfords had not asked us to prove Sophie belonged to them. They were preparing to pay her not to find out. The Ashford family attorney's office occupied the top floor of a stone building overlooking Rittenhouse Square. Everything inside seemed designed to make visitors lower their voices, from the thick carpet to the dark wood walls, and the receptionist who spoke as if bad news required perfect manners. The attorney met us in a conference room at 9. He introduced himself again, then clarified that he represented Ashford Family Holdings, not the foundation, and not the trustee responsible for Victor Ashford's estate. That distinction meant little to me, until he placed a bank letter on the table. $2 million had already been transferred into an escrow account. The funds would be released after Sophie and I signed the documents in front of us. The offer is not an admission of biological relationship, misconduct, or legal liability, he said. It is an opportunity to resolve uncertainty privately. Sophie opened the agreement. It was 22 pages long, too polished to have been written overnight. A date code at the bottom showed that the original template had existed for years. Someone had anticipated the possibility that Victor Ashford's hidden granddaughter might return long before Evelyn saw the birthmark. The attorney explained that Sophie and I had separate obligations. I could not sign away her rights, and she could not promise away mine. Sophie's section required her to release any claim against the Ashford Descendants Trust. She would agree not to seek a DNA comparison, beneficiary determination, or amendment of any family record. She could not publicly state that she was connected to Victor, Evelyn, Caroline, or any other Ashford. Another clause prohibited her from contacting Caroline or Caroline's sons unless Caroline gave written permission. My section required me to sign a separate non-disclosure agreement, surrender the original note and pendant, and release any future claim connected to the way Sophie's identity had been concealed. The attorney delivered every sentence in the same measured tone. He might have been explaining a property boundary instead of asking a young woman to erase the first 18 years of her life. $2 million was more money than I had ever expected to see. The balance on my mortgage was just over $92,000. Sophie's scholarship would cover most of her first year, but not 4 years of tuition, housing, books, and everything afterward. My Subaru had stalled twice the previous winter, and some mornings my fingers hurt so badly that I soaked them in warm water before trying to thread a needle. That money could have released us from every practical fear I carried. It could not answer why Caroline knew Sophie's first name. Sophie turned the pages slowly, reading more carefully than the attorney expected. She stopped at a paragraph near the end. and read it again. "What does this mean?" she asked. The attorney leaned forward. "Which provision?" "The part where I agree never to request recognition of my identity, even if I later obtain independent proof. It prevents future litigation. It prevents me from asking who I am. It provides finality for everyone involved." Sophie looked at the bank letter, then at the clause forbidding her from contacting Caroline's children. Her hand closed around the pendant. I saw the pulse jumping at the base of her throat, but when she spoke, her voice was steady. "What are you afraid I'll inherit, the money or the truth?" The attorney did not answer. For several seconds, no one moved. I could hear the faint ticking of a clock behind me and traffic far below the windows. Sophie closed the agreement and pushed the bank letter across the table. "I'm not signing this." "You should take time to consider the offer," the attorney said. "It expires at 5 this afternoon." "Then it expires at 5. He glanced toward me. "Mrs. Mercer, perhaps you understand what this could provide for your daughter." I understand exactly what it could provide. The painful part was that I did. Sophie placed one hand flat on the agreement. "I want a complete copy. I also want the name of the person who authorized the offer in writing. I will have to consult my client." "You already consulted someone before $2 million went into escrow." The attorney's expression remained controlled, but he did not contradict her. "All future communication will go through a lawyer I choose," Sophie continued. "Not someone from the foundation, not someone hired by the Ashfords." He looked at the pendant. "The necklace is included among the items requested for return. It was found with me, entered into police inventory, and released to my mother by court order. I'm keeping it." The attorney gathered the unsigned pages, but left a copy for us. He reminded Sophie that rejecting the settlement did not establish any right to the trust. "I know," she said. "It only establishes that I'm not for sale." She stood before I could reach for her coat. Sophie made it through the elevator and across the lobby without showing anything. The moment we stepped into the parking garage, her knees weakened. I caught her arm. "Sit down." She shook her head and hurried toward a concrete pillar. She barely reached a trash can before she vomited. I held her hair away from her face while her body shook. The calm young woman who had challenged a family attorney disappeared, leaving my 18-year-old daughter frightened and humiliated under the fluorescent garage lights. When she could breathe again, I gave her a bottle of water from my bag. "I thought I was going to faint in there," she whispered. "You didn't." I wanted the money for a second. "There is nothing wrong with understanding what it could do." She wiped her mouth with a tissue. "They knew that. That's why it was $2 million and not 20,000. I helped her into the car. Before starting the engine, I said we could leave Philadelphia for a few days. We could drive west, turn off our phones, and let a lawyer read the agreement before we did anything else." Sophie stared through the windshield. "Leave for what?" "To get some distance. From them or from the questions. Both, if we need it." She turned toward me. Her eyes were red, but her voice had sharpened again. "You heard what Caroline said last night. You saw previously verified household in that email. Someone has known about us for years, and your first idea is to leave. My first idea is to keep you safe. By helping them keep everything closed?" The question hurt because it was not entirely unfair. "I am not helping them. You told me some doors stay closed for a reason. Now they're offering money to lock the same door, and you want to drive away from it." I gripped the steering wheel. "What do you want me to do?" "I want every record you have. Not the version you think I can handle. Everything." We drove home in silence. I placed the adoption file on the kitchen table, along with the police inventory, court release order, medical summary, agency letters, and photocopy of the original note. Sophie arranged the pages by date. She noticed the gap almost immediately. "There's nothing here from the spring after I was found." The investigation was still open. Not every contact generated a formal report. She looked at me. "Was there a contact?" My eyes moved toward the locked drawer beneath the counter. "That was enough." I opened the drawer and removed the cream-colored card I had kept beneath my old tax receipts for 17 years. Sophie unfolded it and read the 6 handwritten words. "Thank you for keeping her safe." She placed the card beside the photocopy of the note. The slant of the letters was similar. So was the narrow loop in the word her. Who sent this? I never proved it, but I think it was Rose Alvarez. You knew Rose. I knew her through the foster network. She came to the shop a few months after you arrived. Sophie stared at me as if the floor had shifted beneath her again. She came to see me? She asked about the placement. She watched you sleep. And you never told me? I gave Child Services a copy of the card. Rose was ill. She stopped attending meetings, and then she died. At the time, I did not know she was connected to your birth. But later you wondered. Yes. Why didn't you look for her family? Why didn't you tell me when I asked about the pendant? I could have reminded her that I had raised her, protected her, and never lied about the adoption. Every one of those things was true, and none answered her question. I was afraid, I said. Of what? That whoever left you might come back. That you would find people with more money and more answers than I had. That you would look at our life and think I had kept you from something better. Her face crumpled before she could stop it. She pushed away from the table and covered her mouth as she cried. I reached toward her, then let my hand fall. Comfort was not something I had the right to force on her in that moment. You did not lie about loving me, she said through uneven breaths. You lied to yourself about why you stopped looking. I did not defend myself because she was right. The Ashfords had offered us money to keep their secret. By midnight, Sophie knew I had kept one small piece of it too. The morning after Sophie found Rose's card, she placed it beside the original note and photographed both under the kitchen light. She did not ask me to help. That hurt, but I understood why. I opened the old foster network binder I had not touched in years. Rose Alvarez's name appeared beside several reunification workshops, along with an outdated phone number and the address of a nursing office that had closed long ago. An obituary gave me what the binder could not. Rose had died in June 2009 at 52. The notice listed one surviving relative, her younger sister, Elena Alvarez. I called before I could lose my nerve. Elena was silent when I said my name. Then she asked whether the girl Rose had left was with me. Sophie looked up from across the table. Yes, I said. She's 18 now. Elena let out a breath that sounded as if she had been holding it for years. She invited us to her home that afternoon. She lived in a small brick house in Upper Darby, with potted herbs crowded along the kitchen window and family photographs covering one wall. Rose appeared in several of them, usually wearing scrubs, her dark hair pulled into a loose knot. Elena studied Sophie before inviting us to sit. Her eyes moved toward the pendant, but she did not reach for it. You have Rose's eyes when you're suspicious, Sophie said. Elena gave a sad smile. Then you already know she was not easy to fool. She brought a sealed brown envelope from a cabinet above the refrigerator. Across the front, Rose had written 2 conditions in blue ink. Open when Sophia turns 18, or if the Ashford family comes looking for her. Sophie's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. You knew about the Ashfords? I asked. Not at first, Elena said. Rose told me almost nothing while she was alive. She said knowing too much could make me part of something I had not chosen. Elena had found the envelope among Rose's papers after her death. She had searched adoption notices and old newspaper reports, but the baby's name had been sealed with the case. Without knowing Diane Mercer had adopted Sophia, she had no way to find us. I told her about the memorial, Evelyn's reaction, and the $2 million offer. Elena pushed the envelope toward Sophie. Then both conditions have been met. Inside were 4 items. The first was a signed page bearing Caroline Ashford's name. The second was a photocopy of a letter. The third was a certified mail receipt. The last was a page torn from a lined notebook in Rose's handwriting. Sophie began with the signed page. Caroline stated that she was the mother of Sophia Reed, born on the 6th of October 2008. She objected to the private adoption her family had arranged and asked Rose to take the baby somewhere safe and place her into protective custody. She asked Rose to take me, Sophie said. Yes, Elena replied. But that paper did not transfer custody. It did not make Rose your guardian or give her permission to choose your adoptive mother. Elena did not soften the truth to protect her sister. Rose knew leaving you at Diane's apartment was not a lawful safe haven surrender. A hospital, police station, or emergency services facility would have been the proper place. She chose Diane's door anyway. Why? Sophie asked. Elena looked at me. Because of Micah. My chest tightened at the name. Rose had watched me care for him through the reunification program. She had seen me sit beside his mother during supervised visits and help her learn his bedtime routine again. After he went home, Rose asked whether I regretted not fighting to keep him. I had told her that loving a child did not make every other person who loved him my enemy. Rose remembered that, Elena said. She believed you would call the police, surrender every item with the baby, and cooperate with child services. She knew you would not hide Sophia just because you wanted her. Sophie looked at me, and for a moment the anger between us eased. Elena continued. Rose also believed that if Sophia's mother came back ready to take responsibility, you would not erase her. The relief disappeared. The sentence landed exactly where my guilt lived. Rose was wrong about one part, I said. She was not wrong about the woman you were, Sophie replied quietly. She just did not know how afraid you would become. I accepted that because I had asked Sophie for the truth, not comfort. Elena explained what happened the night Rose brought her to Willow Street. Rose placed the baby in a covered bassinet away from the draft. The pendant and note were secured inside, not placed around Sophia's neck. Rose waited in the stairwell until she heard my door open, then walked to a payphone and called 911. She never left you alone for more than a few minutes, Elena told Sophie. That does not make what she did legal. It means she understood the danger and tried to limit it. Rose could not take Sophia herself. Her cancer had already spread, and she knew she might have months rather than years. She also believed that if she went directly to the authorities with Caroline's signed statement, Victor's lawyers would turn the situation into a fight Rose could not survive long enough to finish. She made a choice she knew could have sent her to jail, Elena said. I loved my sister, but I will not pretend every part of it was right. Sophie opened the photocopied letter next. It was dated the 12th of January 2009, 3 months after she had been found. Rose addressed Caroline by name. Sophia was alive. The letter included the child welfare case number and my full name. It stated that Sophia was in a licensed foster placement and that the adoption had not been completed. Rose wrote that Caroline still had time to contact the agency, identify herself as the mother, and ask the court to hear her claim. She warned that waiting would make every step more difficult. Sophie reached the final line and stopped. You asked me to save her from your family. I cannot save you from the choice you make next. The certified mail receipt was attached behind the copy. It showed delivery to Caroline's private office on January 15. The signature read C. Ashford. Caroline had not yet married Jonathan Caldwell. There was no confusion over the surname. She signed for it, Sophie said. The receipt proves someone signed that name, I said carefully. It does not prove she read every word. Sophie looked at me with frustration. Why are you defending her? I'm trying not to claim more than the evidence proves. Elena nodded. Rose wrote in her notebook that the letter went directly to Caroline's office, not Victor's house or the foundation, but I cannot tell you who opened it after it arrived. Sophie wanted certainty. I could see it in the way she pressed the receipt flat against the table. Maybe Victor intercepted it, she said. Or Evelyn had someone sign for her. It was possible. Caroline had described a family that controlled her money, movements, and information. The receipt narrowed the possibilities, but it did not close them. The final page was Rose's journal entry. She wrote that choosing my door had never been intended to keep Sophia from her birth mother forever. It was meant to create a record outside Ashford control and place the baby with someone who would protect her without destroying the path back to the truth. Rose believed Caroline might come forward once the shock of Daniel's death and Victor's threats no longer controlled her. She also believed I would tell Sophia everything when she was old enough to decide what to do with it. I lowered the page. For 17 years, I had kept Rose's card in a locked drawer. I had told myself I was waiting until Sophie could bear the answer, when the truth was that I had been waiting until I could bear the risk. Sophie read the final sentence aloud. I chose Diane because she knows the difference between giving a child a home and claiming the right to own her story. Her voice broke on the last word. I want to see Caroline again, she said. But this time I want her to bring every letter, every record, everything she ever kept about me. The decision frightened me. I did not try to stop her. Rose had broken the rules to give Sophie a future. Caroline had been given a lawful chance to enter that future and had stayed away. Caroline agreed to meet us 2 days later in a small conference room at the Ashford Foundation. The room was nothing like the grand memorial hall. There were no portraits of Victor, no flowers, and no staff waiting outside to guide us. Only a round table, 4 chairs, and a narrow window overlooking the gray roofs of Philadelphia. Caroline had asked to speak with Sophie alone. I waited in the hallway while Sophie went inside. The door remained partly open, and I could hear the scrape of a chair but not their voices. Less than a minute later, Sophie stepped back out. I want you in there, she said. I searched her face. Are you sure? You're the one person in this story who was actually there for my life. Caroline was standing when I entered. A wooden box sat on the chair beside her, polished dark brown with a small brass latch. Her eyes went to me, then back to Sophie. I thought this might be easier for her without an audience, she said. My mother isn't an audience, Sophie replied. Caroline accepted the correction and sat down. Sophie placed copies of Rose's papers on the table. She started with the page signed on the 7th of October 2008. Is that your signature? Caroline did not pretend to examine it for long. Yes. You asked Rose to take me. I asked her to get you away from my father's attorneys. Caroline folded her hands together. They had already chosen a couple. Everyone kept telling me those people could give you a stable life, as if stability meant I had no right to object. You could have gone with Rose. Pain moved across Caroline's face. I had just given birth. Daniel was dead. My father had taken my phone, my accounts, and every document with my name on it. I thought Rose would bring help back. But she didn't. No. She disappeared with you. There was anger in Caroline's voice, but not the kind directed at someone who had stolen a child. It sounded more like anger at a person who had obeyed the desperate words Caroline later wished she had never spoken. Sophie slid forward the copy of Rose's January letter and the certified mail receipt. This went to your office. Caroline read the delivery date. I had an assistant then. My father controlled the staff around me, including my mail. The receipt says C. Ashford. Assistant signed for me all the time. Did you read it? Caroline looked toward the window. I don't remember receiving this letter. It was not a denial. It was an answer designed to survive, whether proof appeared later or not. Sophie noticed that too, but the explanation could not yet be disproved. Victor had controlled Caroline's money and movements. He had hired the attorneys. It was possible someone had signed her name and carried the envelope directly to him. Caroline touched the wooden box beside her. I did not come here to defend my father, she said. I came because there are things I should have given you years ago. She placed the box on the table and opened the latch. Inside were envelopes arranged by date. Some were thick, others only a single sheet. Each had a year written in the corner and the same date beneath it. October 6. 18 birthdays. Sophie stared at them. What are these? Letters to you. Caroline lifted the first envelope with both hands, careful not to bend it. I wrote this when you turned 1. I didn't know where you were. I did not even know if Rose had kept the name Sophia. She passed it across the table. Sophie unfolded the page. Caroline had written about wondering whether her daughter had taken her first steps, whether she slept with her arms above her head, and whether anyone sang to her when she cried. The second letter asked if Sophia had learned to say her own name. Another described a yellow dress Caroline had bought for a 5-year-old, then hidden in the back of her closet because she had nowhere to send it. The words were not polished like Caroline's speeches at the foundation. Some sentences had been crossed out. Ink had blurred where tears had fallen. I wanted them to be false because false things were easier to fight. Instead, I saw evidence of a woman who had suffered and had found a way to keep that suffering private enough that it never cost her anything. Sophie read a line from the letter written on her 18th birthday. I have rehearsed asking your forgiveness so many times that I no longer know whether the words belong to you or to the version of you I created, because the real girl was too frightening to face. Sophie lowered the page. Caroline's voice broke. I never stopped loving you. For a moment, Sophie looked younger than 18. Her anger did not disappear, but it loosened. She reached toward the remaining envelopes, as if they might contain the missing years in a form she could finally hold. I understood the temptation. Caroline had not forgotten her birthday. She had not erased Sophia's name from her own private life. The box gave Sophie something she had wanted since childhood, proof that the woman who left her had thought about her afterward. Then Sophie opened the letter, marked the 6th of October 2015. She read quietly at first. Halfway down the page, her finger stopped. What does this mean? Caroline looked at the letter. Which part? Sophie turned it around. I heard you were sick that winter. I prayed someone sat beside you until your breathing became easy again. The room changed. Sophie had been 6 when she developed pneumonia. I had taped a sign to the door of my shop saying it would remain closed while my daughter recovered. Customers brought soup and left cards in the mail slot, but no newspaper had reported it. No public biography mentioned it. How did you know I was sick? Sophie asked. Caroline's eyes moved too quickly toward me. Someone connected to the family heard about it. Who? I don't remember. It was a long time ago. I did remember the sign on the shop door. Someone could have seen it without breaking into medical records. But first, they would have needed to know which shop belonged to me. Sophie reached deeper into the box and found a photograph tucked behind the letter. It showed a school auditorium decorated with paper snowflakes. Sophie stood on stage with the elementary choir, 2nd row from the left. The picture had been taken from the audience. She studied it, then looked at Caroline. Were you there? No. Then who took this? I asked someone to make sure you were safe. The sentence was almost a confession, but Caroline delivered it as if it proved restraint. You had someone watching me, Sophie said. Not watching you all the time. I only needed to know you were healthy and cared for. How many times? Caroline reached for the box. Sophie, please understand that I was trying not to disturb your life. I put my hand on the lid before she could close it. If you knew where she was, why didn't you knock on our door? Caroline looked at me with tears filling her eyes. Because she already had a mother. The words found the tenderest part of me. For 1 second, they sounded noble. Caroline had seen that Sophie was loved and chosen not to tear apart her home. Then I remembered Rose's letter. Caroline had been offered a lawful chance before the adoption was complete. Later, she had found us again and decided that knowing Sophie was safe gave her permission to remain absent. She had made the decision for all 3 of us. Sophie pulled the box back toward herself. How many times did you check? Caroline's hand tightened on the lid. There were occasional updates. How many? This is not the right way to go through private papers. They're letters addressed to me. They were never sent. The truth of that sentence seemed to frighten Caroline. She closed the box too quickly, catching several loose pages beneath the lid. A thin folder slid from the bottom and fell across the table. The top page faced us for only a few seconds. Mercer Household Verification. The 14th of February 2015. Report 15 to 2047. Caroline snatched it up before Sophie could read the paragraph below. What is that? Sophie asked. An old background report. Give me a copy. I can't. It contains private information. About my life. About other people too. Sophie did not grab the folder or reach for her phone. She sat perfectly still, but her face had closed again. I repeated the number silently until it fixed itself in my memory. Years of writing invoice codes and alteration measurements had trained me not to lose numbers once I saw them. 15到2047. Caroline gathered the letters back into the box. I brought these because I wanted you to know I cared. Sophie stood. You brought them because you wanted me to feel sorry for you. Caroline flinched, but Sophie did not add another sharp sentence. She seemed too tired to turn her pain into eloquence. In the hallway, she leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. We need our own lawyer, she said. Not to sue anyone yet. I just want to know what that report was. I nodded. The next morning, we would call Mara Klein, the trusts and estates attorney recommended through legal aid. Caroline had not spent 18 years wondering whether Sophie was safe. She had known enough to stop wondering and had still stayed away. Mara Klein did not promise us justice. She sat behind a desk, crowded with legal pads, read every document twice, and told Sophie that wanting the truth did not automatically give her the right to force a family to surrender it. The birthmark proves nothing in court, she said. The pendant and note establish where certain objects came from, not who your mother is. What you have is enough to raise a serious question, but not enough to answer it. Sophie placed her savings envelope on Mara's desk. It held money she had set aside for college applications and deposits. I added what I could from the shop account. The retainer was smaller than what the Ashford attorney probably charged for a single afternoon, but Mara accepted it. What can we do? Sophie asked. We notify the trustee that a possible beneficiary exists. We preserve the documents you already have, identify the trust language, and ask whether Victor Ashford left any record concerning an unrecognized descendant. And if they ignore us, then we decide what comes next, one step at a time. Mara made copies of the police inventory, the court order releasing the pendant and note, Rose's papers, and the page where I had written the number from Caroline's fallen report. 15到2047. She warned us not to contact Caroline again until the trustee responded. She also told Sophie not to post anything online, no matter how angry she became. This is not about protecting the Ashfords, Mara said. It is about protecting your credibility. Sophie nodded, though I could tell she hated having to behave carefully, while the people who hid her had spent 18 years making their own rules. The Ashford Descendants Trust was not controlled by Evelyn or Caroline. A corporate trustee in Wilmington administered it under Delaware law. Victor had built a verification period into the agreement, which meant no money would be distributed immediately after his death. Mara's notice was enough to pause the process while the trustee reviewed Sophie's claim. For 6 days, we heard nothing. Sophie went to school, and I opened the shop each morning, but neither of us behaved as if life were normal. Every time my phone rang, she looked toward it. Every time an unfamiliar car slowed near the window, I wondered whether someone had come to watch us again. On the 7th day, Mara called. The trustee found the report number. Sophie closed her eyes. I gripped the edge of the cutting table. Mara asked us to come to her office that afternoon. When we arrived, a thin folder waited on the conference table. She explained that the trustee had located a contingent descendant file, Victor transferred when the trust became irrevocable. The file had existed for years. Victor had known there might be another grandchild. Mara slid the first document toward us. It was a memorandum from the attorney who prepared the private adoption in 2008. It described an unnamed newborn, a birth mother who had not signed final consent, and a nurse who removed the baby before placement. Another page recorded a call involving a foundling case in Philadelphia. Victor's attorney believed the child might be Caroline's daughter, but recommended withdrawing rather than identifying the birth family in court. Sophie stared at the sentence. "He knew where I was," she said. "He knew about the case." Mara corrected gently. "The file does not prove he knew the exact placement at that time. The distinction mattered legally. Emotionally, it changed little. Victor had allowed the system to search for parents, while his lawyers stood close enough to recognize the child and chose silence." Mara turned to Rose's January letter. Unlike the copy Elena had kept, this one contained a handwritten note from Victor's attorney, stating that Caroline had received it. Below that sat Report 15 to 2047. The investigator had not broken into hospital records. He had photographed the public sign on my shop door saying I was closed while my daughter recovered from pneumonia. He had confirmed through property records that I owned the townhouse, and through public court records that the adoption was legal. The report described my shop, our home, Sophie's school activities, and the ordinary condition of our life. Stable household. No evidence of neglect. Child appears closely bonded with adoptive mother. I hated seeing our life reduced to lines written by a stranger who had watched from across the street. The report was careful, almost clinical, but every page meant someone had stood outside my shop and looked through our windows without our knowledge. At the bottom of the final page, Caroline had written 4 words in blue ink. "No contact. Continue confidentiality." Sophie read them without moving. Mara placed 2 shorter reports beside the first. One was dated 2019, when Sophie was 10. The other was from 2023, when she was 14. The updates were brief. They confirmed we still lived together, Sophie was doing well in school, and there had been no public attempt to search for her birth family. Caroline had not checked once in a moment of panic. She had returned to the question again and again. "She knew when I was 6, Sophie said. Then 10, then 14. Her voice sounded calm, but her hands had begun trembling. Mara showed us one final email. Caroline had approved the $2 million settlement through Ashford Family Holdings. Evelyn had agreed to the amount, but the authorization came from Caroline. The same woman who said too much time had passed had tried to purchase more silence. Mara also explained that the foundation had opened a separate review. An audit showed Caroline used scholarship records to access our phone number after the memorial without a legitimate business purpose. "That review is not part of the trust claim," Mara said. "Do not expect it to resolve quickly." Sophie barely heard her. She stood so suddenly that her chair struck the wall. I followed her into the hallway, where she pressed both palms against her face. "She knew where I was," she said. "She knew you were taking care of me. She knew I got sick. She knew what school I went to." I waited. "What if that is what I inherited from her?" Sophie asked. "What if leaving people when they become inconvenient is somewhere inside me?" I wanted to tell her she was nothing like Caroline. The answer came too easily, and easy answers had already harmed her enough. "Blood can give you her eyes," I said. "It cannot make your choices for you." She lowered her hands. "You made choices for me too." The truth of it hurt more because I had finally stopped denying it. "Yes, you kept Rose's card. Yes, you decided I was safer not knowing." "I did." Sophie looked back through the glass wall at the documents on Mara's table. "How are you different?" I could have listed 18 years of meals, fevers, school meetings, and bills. Those things mattered, but they did not erase the choice I had made. I am different, only if I stop doing it now. When we returned to Mara's office, I opened the case I had carried from home. I placed the original note on the table, still inside its protective sleeve. Then the pendant, Rose's card, the adoption file, the police inventory, and the court order. I pushed everything toward Sophie. "These are yours." She looked at the pendant. "You gave it to me years ago. I mean all of it. The records, the decisions, the right to speak to Caroline, and the right not to. I will give Mara every authorization I can legally give. I will not hide another page." Sophie's eyes filled. But she did not reach for me. I was afraid the truth would take you from me, I said. I will not let that fear make me another person who chooses for you. I did not ask her to forgive me. I did not ask her to promise she would still come home after meeting Caroline. After a long silence, Sophie gathered the papers and placed them in her own folder. Then she told Mara she wanted one private meeting with Caroline and Evelyn before the foundation publicly appointed Caroline to lead Mothers Forward. No cameras, Sophie said. No press. I don't want a spectacle. What do you want? Mara asked. Sophie opened her notebook and wrote 3 questions. Did you want me when I was born? When did you know I was alive? Why didn't you come? The question was no longer whether Caroline had lost her daughter. It was how many times she had found Sophie and chosen not to come. On the 29th of October 2026, Mara met us outside a small conference room at the Ashford Foundation. The ceremony appointing Caroline to lead Mothers Forward had been postponed. She remained on administrative leave while the foundation reviewed her use of Sophie's scholarship records. The corporate trustee had kept the descendants' trust frozen, and Evelyn had been removed temporarily from any advisory role connected to Sophie's claim. None of those decisions was final. They are precautions, not verdicts, Mara told us. No one is receiving money today, and no one is being permanently removed from anything in this room. Sophie nodded. She wore the silver pendant against a plain black sweater. In one hand, she carried copies of the investigator's report and the unsigned settlement. In the other, she held the notebook containing the 3 questions she had written in Mara's office. Do you want me inside? Mara asked. Sophie looked at me, then at the closed door. No lawyers unless someone refuses to answer. Mara remained in the hallway. Caroline and Evelyn sat on opposite sides of the table when we entered. The space had no windows and no portraits of Victor. Without the foundation's public stage around them, they looked less like members of a dynasty and more like 2 women who had spent years agreeing not to say certain things aloud. Sophie sat across from Caroline. I took the chair beside my daughter but did not open the folder or speak for her. She placed the report and settlement on the table. This is not a negotiation, she said. I'm not here to ask how much more you'll pay. Caroline looked at the pendant. I never wanted the lawyers to approach you that way. Sophie slid the authorization email beside the settlement. Caroline's name appeared beneath the approval. You signed it. Caroline lowered her eyes. Sophie opened her notebook. Her fingers trembled slightly, but when she spoke, her voice was clear. Did you want me when I was born? Caroline's face changed. The careful expression she used in public disappeared. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. I named you Sophia before my father could reduce you to paperwork, she said. I held you after Rose cleaned you. You had dark hair, and one hand curled against your cheek. When I saw the mark on your shoulder, I thought it looked like a little moon. Evelyn shifted in her chair. That was what I called it, she said. Caroline was exhausted. Victor had already told her what would happen if she refused the adoption. Sophie looked toward her. What would happen? He would cut her off completely, Evelyn replied. No home, no accounts, no tuition, no family support. Daniel was dead, and Caroline had no income of her own. I was frightened, Caroline said. I thought I had lost every person who might stand beside me. I believed that part. Caroline had been 23, grieving, physically weak, and trapped beneath a father who understood exactly how to make money feel like survival. Sophie believed it too. I saw compassion pass briefly across her face. Then she asked the second question. When did you know I was alive? Caroline drew a slow breath. January 2009. Evelyn turned sharply toward her. What? Caroline did not look at her mother. Rose sent a certified letter to my office, she said. It included the case number and Diane's name. You told us you never received anything from her, Evelyn said. I lied. The word settled heavily in the room. Caroline admitted that she had signed for the envelope herself. She had read Rose's warning that the adoption was not final and that she could still appear before the court. Victor had found the letter in her desk several days later. He told her that coming forward would expose the hidden pregnancy, the private birth, and the failed adoption. He threatened to leave her without money and destroy Daniel's reputation by portraying him as unstable and irresponsible. He said Sophie was safe, Caroline told us. He said appearing would only create another scandal around a child who had already found a home. Sophie did not argue with Victor's cruelty. She looked only at Caroline. "Why didn't you come?" Caroline's hands closed around each other. "At first, because I was still dependent on my father. Then I met Jonathan. I told him I had lost a baby after birth. By the time we were engaged, telling the truth meant admitting I had lied to him from the beginning." She looked toward the report. "When you were 6, I had money of my own. I hired someone to find out where you were. The report said Diane had adopted you, that you were safe, and that you loved her. That was when you wrote, 'No contact,'" Sophie said. "Yes. Why?" "Because you had a mother. You had a school, friends, a home. I told myself that walking into your life would be selfish." Sophie's jaw tightened. "What were you protecting me from when I was 6? Caroline opened her mouth but did not answer. The silence lasted long enough to become an answer of its own. Finally, Caroline said, "I was protecting the life you already had." "No," Sophie replied. "You were protecting the life you had." Caroline flinched. She spoke about Jonathan, then Lucas and Owen. Each year made the truth more dangerous. If she admitted Sophie existed, she would have to explain the lie to her husband, her children, the foundation, and everyone who believed her public story. "The longer I waited, the more people the truth could hurt," she said. "The longer you waited, the more expensive honesty became for you," Sophie answered. Caroline's eyes filled. "I wrote to you every birthday." Sophie looked at the woman who had kept 18 letters in a wooden box, rather than place one in the mail. "You wrote to yourself. A letter becomes mine when you send it." Caroline looked away. Evelyn straightened as if she could still restore order by explaining it. "Diane gave you a good life. We were told you were safe, and clearly you were. Whatever mistakes were made, the result was the best one available. I had intended to remain silent unless Sophie needed me, but Evelyn had taken 18 years of my daughter's life and turned it into evidence that the people who abandoned her had acted wisely. A good result does not make what you did good," I said. Evelyn stared at me. "You did not choose me because I was the best mother for Sophie," I continued. "You did not know me. You stayed away because admitting who she was would have cost your family something." For the first time, Evelyn had no prepared reply. Sophie placed the settlement authorization directly in front of Caroline, who approved the $2 million. Caroline wiped beneath one eye. "I did." Evelyn looked at her again. "You told me council recommended the amount." "They did. I authorized it through the family company." "Why?" Sophie asked. Caroline's voice weakened. "I was trying to protect Lucas and Owen." Sophie sat back. She did not raise her voice. "You chose your life after I was born. You chose it again when Rose wrote to you. You chose it when you found me at 6. Then you chose it again when you signed this." Caroline pressed her lips together. "My sons have done nothing to you," she said. "I know. They cannot become part of a public scandal. I will not release their addresses, school information, or anything private about them. They are children, and this is not their fault." Relief crossed Caroline's face too quickly. Sophie continued. "But I will not stay silent about you using foundation records to find me. I will not pretend the money was kindness, and I will not deny who I am to protect the story you told your family." Caroline looked at me, then back at Sophie. "Where does that leave us?" Sophie touched the pendant. "You are my biological mother. Diane is my mother." Caroline absorbed the distinction without collapsing or demanding comfort. Her pain remained hers to carry. Beside her, Evelyn looked from the report to her daughter. She had spent years believing Victor alone had sealed the secret. Now she understood Caroline had continued it without telling even her. "You knew all those years," Evelyn said. Caroline nodded. The room became quiet again. After a while, Caroline asked, "May I write to you?" Sophie closed her notebook. "You can send them. I cannot promise I will read them." She stood, and I stood with her. No one had been arrested. No inheritance had changed hands. Caroline was still on leave, the trustees' review was still open, and months of difficult decisions remained ahead. But when we walked out of that room, one thing had already changed permanently. For the first time in 18 years, Caroline was not allowed to call silence love. By March 2027, the truth had stopped arriving as a shock and started arriving as paperwork. A voluntary DNA test completed in January confirmed what the pendant, Rose's records, Victor's contingent file, and Caroline's own admissions had already established. Sophie was Victor Ashford's biological granddaughter and qualified as a descendant under the trust. The result did not place $20 million in her bank account. The amount was an estimated beneficial interest, still subject to taxes, investment changes, legal costs, and the corporate trustees' rules. Sophie could receive approved support for college and other reasonable needs, but she could not spend the trust freely at 18. Mara called that protection. Sophie called it the first sensible decision anyone in the Ashford family had made about money. She never accepted the $2 million settlement. She also refused to surrender what the trust legally owed her merely to prove that she was better than Caroline. "Keeping what belongs to me is not the same as letting them buy me," she said. I agreed, though I was still learning how to speak about millions without feeling as if the number itself might change the person sitting across from me. The foundation completed its own review in January. Caroline had accessed Sophie's scholarship file for a personal matter, used foundation employees to arrange private meetings, and failed to disclose a conflict involving one of the scholarship recipients. The board removed her from the mother's forward appointment after the investigation, not because she had given birth to Sophie or because the public demanded punishment. They removed her because she had used an organization meant to help young women as another tool to control her own daughter. Jonathan learned the truth. Sophie asked Mara to keep Lucas and Owen's names, schools, and private information out of every public filing. Whatever Caroline had done, her sons had not chosen the lie they were raised inside. We heard that Caroline and Jonathan were in counseling. I did not ask for more details. Their marriage was not the story Sophie needed to carry. Evelyn sent one letter through Mara. It contained no request for forgiveness and no invitation to the Ashford home. She admitted that she had helped Victor turn Caroline's fear into obedience, and later used Sophie's good life with me as proof that their cruelty had somehow become wisdom. Sophie placed the letter in a drawer without reading it a second time. Caroline began sending letters too. This time, the envelopes had stamps, postmarks, and Sophie's real address. She did not write every week or demand a response. She wrote about Daniel, the night Sophie was born, and the choices she had spent years calling impossible, because admitting they were choices would have required her to accept responsibility. Sophie kept the letters together. Some days she read one. Other days she left the drawer closed. Caroline was finally sending them. That did not mean Sophie owed her an answer. The distance between Sophie and me took longer to close than any legal file. We still ate breakfast at the same table and argued about whether she needed a heavier coat. She still worked at the shop on Saturdays, and I still found coffee rings beside the register after she left. But there were moments when she studied me as if checking whether another hidden page existed. One evening, I found her sorting the adoption records again. I sat across from her and apologized without explaining myself first. "I should have told you about Rose's card when you asked about the pendant," I said. "I should have helped you look instead of deciding that my fear was a reason to stop." Sophie traced the edge of the cream-colored card. "I know you thought you were protecting me. I was protecting myself, too." She looked up. "I was afraid you would find a family with more money, a bigger house, and answers I could never give you. I thought if the door stayed closed, I could not be replaced. You raised me, she said. That should have been enough for you to trust. It should have been. I did not ask whether she forgave me. I had learned that an apology became another kind of pressure when it demanded immediate comfort. After a while, Sophie said, I thought about taking the 2 million. I know. You don't know how close I came. I saw you rubbing your hands before work. I thought about paying off the house and making you close the shop before it hurt you more. The shame in her voice surprised me. Thinking about the money does not make you Caroline. How do you know? Because money was not her worst choice. Her worst choice was deciding someone else had to disappear so she could keep her life unchanged. Sophie looked toward the sewing machine near the window. I wanted the money to change your life. That is not the same thing. A week later, Sophie asked whether the apartment on Willow Street still existed. The building had been sold and was being renovated. I called the property manager, explained that my daughter had once been found outside one of the apartments, and asked whether we could visit the hallway before construction reached the 3rd floor. He agreed to meet us on a Saturday morning. The neighborhood looked smaller than I remembered. The laundromat had become a coffee shop, and the payphone Rose once used was gone. Inside the building, the wallpaper had been stripped away, exposing pale rectangles where family photographs and mirrors had hung. The property manager unlocked the 3rd floor and gave us a few minutes alone. The door to my old apartment had been painted white. The brass number had changed, but the worn corner of the frame remained. Sophie stood on the same patch of floor, where Rose had placed the bassinet. I could still see it when I closed my eyes. The cream blanket, the muslin pouch, and a newborn too tired to cry loudly. For 18 years I was afraid someone with more money, a better house, and the right blood would make you realize I was not enough, I said. Sophie turned toward me. She gave me away so her life would not have to change. You opened the door and changed yours. She removed the pendant and placed it in my palm. The silver had warmed against her skin. For a moment, I thought she wanted me to keep it as proof that she had chosen my side. I closed her fingers around it instead. This belongs to your history. You do not have to choose between carrying it and being my daughter. Sophie looked down at the initials Caroline had worn long before either of us knew her name. Then she fastened the chain around her neck again. She did not have to erase Caroline to love me. She did not have to reject the Ashford Trust to prove that money had not purchased her. She did not have to pretend Rose's choice was lawful, Evelyn's choice was merciful, or my silence had been harmless. She could carry every part of the truth without allowing any one part to define her. When we reached the stairs, Sophie stopped and looked back at the door. Are you ready? I asked. She reached for my hand. Money could tell Sophie what she was owed. The truth could tell her where she came from. But when she held my hand before we walked away from that door, 18 years of staying had already told her who her mother was.